Montana Territory. Spring of 1878, the wind came cold off the mountains that morning, cutting sharp across the plains as Isaiah Alder stepped out of his cabin and saw her. She was half stumbling, half dragging herself down the narrow trail that wound through the pines, her dress torn near the hem, bonnet dangling from one hand. Her eyes locked onto his like she had just found the last safe place in the world. Isaiah had not spoken to anyone in weeks. He kept to himself, up here near the edge of the Bitterroots, working a small patch of land and trapping through the winter. That morning he had gone out to check the line, rifle slung across his back, expecting only silence and snowmelt. Instead, a woman was limping toward him like her legs might give out any second. He took 2 long strides forward. "You hurt?" she swayed. "No, just tired." Her legs buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground. She was light, all bone and exhaustion. Her cheeks were hollow, lips cracked, and her hands clutched a small bundle wrapped tight in a shawl. Isaiah didn't ask questions then. He picked her up and carried her inside. The fire was already burning low in the hearth. He set her down on the cot and laid the bundle beside her. She clutched it protectively even as her eyes drifted shut. He knelt beside her. "What's your name, Loretta?" she whispered. "Loretta Ellsworth." Isaiah dipped a cloth in the water basin and wiped her face gently. "You got family nearby?" She shook her head just barely. "No, just me." It was hours before she stirred again. He sat in the chair by the window, sharpening his knife, watching the way her chest rose and fell. The bundle beside her shifted, and a soft sound came from inside. Isaiah leaned forward and pulled the shawl back, a little girl, maybe 4 years old. Pale and sleeping deep, he stared at her, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. Then he saw another shape beneath the bundle, smaller. Another child. A boy, maybe 2, curled tight like a kitten, his tiny fist close to his mouth. Isaiah stood slowly and walked outside, hands on his hips, staring hard at the wind-blown trees. He had not planned on this. A woman, 2 children. They did not belong in his life. He had built it alone on purpose. But when he went back inside, Loretta was sitting up, her eyes fixed on her children, her hands trembling. "I can leave," she rasped, "if this is too much. I just needed a place to stop, somewhere safe for a night." Isaiah walked over, knelt beside her again. "You are safe now, all of you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Later, when the children woke Cora and Kit, she said softly, naming them like prayers. Isaiah made them a thin porridge and gave them each a carved wooden spoon. Cora clung to Loretta's skirts, wide-eyed and silent. Kit whimpered until Loretta held him close and sang something under her breath. Isaiah stood by the stove, arms crossed. He didn't know what to do with any of it, so he just kept them warm, fed them. Sat by the fire while Cora slowly inched closer to the edge of his chair, her big brown eyes watching him like he might disappear. That night, Loretta sat on the cot, brushing Cora's hair with her fingers. Her voice was quiet. "Their father left us in Idaho City. Said he was going to find work in boys, never came back." Isaiah didn't say much, just nodded. He never looked at them the way you did today. Isaiah turned to her, surprised. "I didn't do anything special. You brought me in, you gave them food, a place to sleep. That's more than anyone else has done in a long time." He looked into the fire. "There's room here if you want to stay." Loretta blinked. "You sure?" "I would not say it if I wasn't." She looked down at her lap, brushing Kit's cheek as he slept curled in her arms. "I can help with the cooking. And cleaning, I know how to sew." Isaiah shrugged. "I could use the help. Spring's late and the work's heavy." Loretta smiled, the first real one he had seen on her face. It hit him harder than he expected. The next morning, she was up before dawn, kneading dough in the kitchen corner, hair tied back with a scrap of ribbon. Cora sat beside her, humming softly, while Kit toddled around on wobbly legs. Isaiah watched from the doorway, arms crossed, something settling in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Later that week, he found Loretta out by the stream, scrubbing clothes on a flat stone. She stood when she saw him, brushing her hands on her skirt. "I never got to thank you," she said. "You do not have to. I want to." She stepped closer, looking up at him in that soft, quiet way she did when the children were asleep and the evening light turned gold through the trees. "You saved us." Isaiah shook his head. "You walked yourself here, you kept your children alive, I just opened a door." She stared at him a long moment. Then she reached up and touched his face, just the edge of his jaw, her fingers warm and real and steady. "Still," she whispered, "thank you." Isaiah swallowed hard. He had not been touched like that in years, not since before the war. Not since before the world had turned hard. Loretta stepped back, but not far. "We'll earn our keep here, I promise." "You already have." That night after the children were asleep, Loretta stood outside beside him, watching the stars. The air was cold, but she did not shiver. "You ever get lonely out here, Isaiah?" He looked down at her. "Used to it." "That's not the same as wanting it." He did not answer, but when she reached out and took his hand, he did not let go, not then, not ever. By mid-April, the snow had receded into the shadows of the trees, and the ground turned soft underfoot. Isaiah hitched the mule to the harrow while Loretta spread seeds from a worn canvas sack. Cora trailed behind, gathering stones in her apron, and Kit sat in a basket nearby, chewing on a leather strap Isaiah had cut for him. "You handle land like you've done it before," Isaiah said, watching the even sweep of her arm. "I haven't," Loretta replied, not looking up. "But I watched my uncle plant corn outside Helena when I was a girl. I remember enough." Isaiah nodded once. She hadn't asked for instruction since the first morning. She learned fast, read the rhythm of things without being told. That mattered more to him than anything spoken. At dusk, he sharpened the scythe while Loretta rinsed the laundry in the basin. She squatted beside the fire, her sleeves rolled, hair damp from a quick rinse at the creek. Cora was inside, humming to Kit while she combed out his curls with her fingers. "You fought," Loretta said, her voice low. Isaiah looked up from the whetstone. "What makes you say that? You don't flinch, but you listen like you expect trouble, and you sleep light." He rested the scythe across his knees. "I was with the 6th Missouri Volunteers. After Vicksburg, I stopped writing home." "Did you have anyone waiting?" she asked. "No, not after the fever took my sister." Loretta's eyes stayed steady on his. "I'm sorry," he gave a slight shake of his head. "It was a long time ago." The fire cracked between them. She didn't press him, and he didn't offer more. Still, something loosened in his chest just a little. The following week, Loretta lined the shelves with dried sage and yarrow she'd gathered near the ridge. She'd found the old tin jars in the shed and scrubbed them clean, labeling each with careful letters. That evening, she handed Isaiah a small brown pouch. "For the stiffness in your shoulder," she said. "You carry it like a weight." He took the pouch, turning it over in his hand. "You notice everything, don't you?" "I had to," she said. "When there's no one else to watch your back, you learn to read a room or a man." He didn't answer, but he put the pouch in the inner pocket of his coat. The next morning, Kit woke crying before dawn, and Loretta sat on the edge of the bed, rocking him with a slow hum. Isaiah stood outside, booted and ready, but didn't leave until the boy settled. He watched the sunrise from the porch, his rifle across his knees, the outline of the mountains crisp against the clear sky. Later that day, while Isaiah fixed the fence at the north edge, Loretta brought him a strip of dried meat and a cup of coffee. "You see many outlaws pass this way?" she asked, handing him the cup. "Not in a long while, too far off the main trails. Most folks pass west of here now." She leaned against the fence post and watched the tree line. "Still. I keep thinking about how far we are from anything." Isaiah sipped the coffee. "That's why this place is quiet." "And lonely," she said, her voice softer. The wind stirred her skirt. He watched the way her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, like she was measuring the distance between who she was and who she had to be. "You miss Idaho City?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I miss the idea of it. I thought we'd build a life there, even if it was small." But nothing ever lasted with him. Isaiah set down the cup. "You don't have to explain." "I know," she said. "I just want to be honest," he nodded once. "That's something I value." She glanced up at him then, and for the first time her gaze lingered longer than a moment, not searching, not wary. Just steady. That night, Loretta stayed out past sundown, tending the small herb patch she'd started near the creek bend. When she returned, her hands were stained with soil and her braid had come loose. "You should have called me in," Isaiah said, handing her a damp cloth. "I like the quiet," she replied. "It gives me time to think." He didn't ask what about. He only watched the way she moved through the room, sure, unhurried, like she belonged there. The next day, a storm rolled down from the north and they spent the afternoon inside. Cora built a fort from quilts and Kit crawled beneath it laughing. Isaiah carved a new spoon while Loretta mended the seam of his flannel shirt with even stitches. "Your mother teach you to sew?" he asked. "No," she said. "The woman who ran the boarding house where I worked before I met him. She said every woman ought to know how to hold a needle steady." Isaiah looked at the stitchwork. "She taught you well." She met his eyes. "There's still a lot I want to learn." He set the carving down. "So do I." They sat quiet after that, the kind of quiet that didn't press or crowd. Just two people with a roof over their heads and the sound of wind at the window pane. That evening, Isaiah stepped out to check the livestock. When he returned, Loretta was watching the door, her expression unreadable. "I never expected to feel safe again," she said without preamble. He took off his coat and hung it by the door. "You are, I know." She crossed the room slowly, stopping just close enough that he could feel the warmth coming off her. "That's what scares me." Isaiah's voice was low. "Why?" "Because it means I might start hoping again." He reached out, his hand settling gently on her arm. "You're not the only one." She closed her eyes for a moment, breathed deep, then opened them. "Then maybe we're both learning to hope again." He nodded. "One day at a time." They stood there until the fire burned low, the room quiet but full. By early May, the ground had firmed beneath their boots, and the scent of pine warmed under the sun. Isaiah built a gate at the south end of the pasture, while Loretta laid out a row of cabbage starts in the kitchen garden. Cora kept watch over Kit beneath the cottonwoods, their laughter rising now and then through the light breeze. It was the first time Isaiah had heard it without an edge of fear. That afternoon, Loretta found Isaiah lifting the last beam into place on the gate. She wiped her palms on the seams of her skirt and stood beside him, studying the line of the fence. "You ever think about what this place might be like in 5 years?" she asked. He set down the hammer. "Not often. You should," she said, glancing up at him. "You've built something worth keeping." Isaiah looked out over the pasture. "I've built it to hold." Loretta brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Maybe it'd hold better with more than one set of hands shaping it." He didn't speak right away, but his eyes met hers. "You thinking of staying that long?" "I'm thinking I already have." That night, she brought out a folded scrap of paper from a tin she'd tucked behind the hearth. She laid it gently on the table beside a lamp lit low. "My mother's bread recipe," she said. "It's the only thing I kept when we left Helena." Isaiah traced the faded ink with his finger. "You want to try it tomorrow?" She nodded. "It won't rise right without a warm place to sit." "Could use that shelf near the stove. I'll clear it." She smiled faintly. "Thank you." He hesitated. "What was she like?" "Quiet," Loretta said, "but she had a way of letting you know you were seen, even when she said nothing." Isaiah pulled his chair closer. "Sounds like someone else I know." Loretta didn't look away this time. "I want to make a home here, Isaiah, not just pass through. You already are." The lamp flickered as the wind pressed against the walls. She reached across the table, her fingers resting on the back of his hand. He didn't move. "I never thought I'd be welcome anywhere again," she said. "You're not just welcome," Isaiah replied. "You matter here." The next morning, Loretta rose before first light, dusted the flour bin, and measured the old recipe by memory. Isaiah stoked the fire while Cora peeled apples, her knees tucked beneath her. Kit played with a carved horse Isaiah had given him the week before, dragging it across the floor with slow, careful hands. By midday, the scent of rising bread filled the cabin. Isaiah leaned in the doorway, watching Loretta brush egg wash across the top of the loaves. She moved with a steadiness that settled something deep in him. I was thinking, she said without turning, come next season we could add chickens. Isaiah stepped inside. There's an old coop near the smokehouse, needs patching. I'll mend it, he nodded. We'd get eggs, maybe trade a few in Deer Lodge come fall. Loretta glanced back. It'd be good to have something to bring into town. Something that proves we're not just getting by. Isaiah studied her face, the way her mouth curved gently when she spoke of the future. You've got a mind for more than survival. She set the loaves aside to cool. I've had enough of barely making it. That evening, after the children were asleep, Isaiah sat outside on the porch bench. Loretta joined him, wrapped in a woven shawl she'd found in the trunk at the back of the cabin. There's a calm here I didn't know I needed, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Even when the days are long. Isaiah leaned back, one boot crossed over the other. Hard work's different when it's honest, when it's yours. Loretta turned toward him. I think I'm falling in love with what we're building. Isaiah's chest tightened. So am I. She reached for his hand and held it between both of hers. It's not just the land or the quiet. It's you. He looked over at her, and in the low light, her eyes held a steadiness that went deeper than gratitude. I never wanted anything I couldn't hold on to, he said. Didn't think that kind of thing was meant for me. You were just waiting for the right hands. Isaiah turned toward her fully then, lifting her chin gently. She didn't flinch. Their lips met in a kiss that was slow and full and certain, the kind that didn't ask permission because it didn't have to. When they parted, Loretta pressed her forehead to his. We'll raise them right, together. Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment. They'll never know fear again. Not while I draw breath. She stayed by his side as the stars came out one by one, the air cooling around them, the scent of fresh bread still lingering on the wind. Nothing rushed. Nothing uncertain. It was the kind of night that settled into the bones and made a man believe in lasting things. The first thunder rolled in late one afternoon, while Loretta was weaving lengths of pine bark into kindling bundles. Isaiah had gone to fell a dying spruce at the far edge of the pasture, and the children were napping after a long morning of helping her turn the soil for carrots. The cabin felt hushed, like the world was holding its breath. By the time Isaiah's boots sounded on the porch, streaks of lightning had begun to flash over the far ridges. He stepped inside with his coat damp and his hands nicked from the saw. Loretta stood from the hearth and met him near the table. You see the clouds turning, she asked. He nodded, brushing water from his sleeves. Storms coming fast, shouldn't be long. He moved toward the wall and unhooked a length of rope. Without speaking further, they stepped into the yard together and tied down what needed securing: the water barrels, the shutter latches, the half-covered stack of chopped wood. By the time they returned inside, the wind had picked up enough to rattle the stovepipe. Loretta closed the door behind her and leaned her back against it, catching her breath. Isaiah struck a match and lit the lamp on the mantel. The glow landed soft across her face, and for a moment neither of them moved. Isaiah took off his hat and hung it on the peg. You ever see a sky that dark so early in the day? Only once. The year I turned 16, a funnel cloud touched down near the Gallatin Valley. Took the roof off the Grange Hall. Let's hope this one's less ambitious. There was a pause before she asked, Did you used to have someone to ride storms out with? Isaiah reached for the kettle. No, she came to stand beside him, watching the steam rise. You ever want to? He poured the water into a tin cup. I stopped thinking about it after the war. Things felt too broken. Loretta accepted the cup when he passed it to her. And now, Isaiah looked toward the back room where the children still slept undisturbed. Now I think about it. She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. I've never had anyone fix a broken bit of fence without being asked. Or split wood before supper so I wouldn't run out come morning. I do what needs doing. You do more than that. The wind howled over the roof, and a loose board groaned in the rafters. Isaiah stepped up the ladder to wedge it tighter while Loretta laid a fresh log on the fire. When he climbed back down, she was spreading a wool blanket on the floor near the hearth. She gestured toward it. I thought we could bring them out here when they wake. Let them fall asleep by the fire. Isaiah glanced outside where the sky had gone near black. That's a good idea. As the rain came, Kit stirred first, rubbing his eyes and clutching the cloth rabbit Loretta had sewn. Cora followed, blinking sleepily and nestling against her mother's side once they were curled on the blanket. Isaiah joined them, sitting with his back to the wall, legs stretched out, one arm resting across his knee. The room filled with the sound of rain on the roof and the children's steady breathing. Loretta leaned against Isaiah's shoulder, the weight of her neither hesitant nor heavy. I used to think peace would feel like silence, she said, but it feels more like this. Isaiah turned his head slightly, enough to see the angle of her jaw, the curve of her neck. I never knew what to call it. You don't always have to name something to know it's real. They sat quiet after that, the fire low and steady. Isaiah felt her hand slip into his, fingers lacing with a trust that didn't need words. The storm passed without waking the children, and by the time the wind died down, the cabin had grown warm again. Later, after tucking Kit and Cora into the cot with extra quilts, Loretta returned to where Isaiah stood by the window, watching the last of the clouds drift west. He spoke without turning. You think you could be content here, for good. She stepped beside him close enough that he could feel the heat of her skin through her sleeve. I already am. He looked down at her then, eyes steady. You sure? Loretta reached up and touched his chest, over the place where his heart beat slow and strong. I've never been more sure of anything. Isaiah covered her hand with his. Then that's settled. When she smiled this time, it wasn't out of relief or gratitude, it was the kind of smile that came from knowing something would last. They stood watching the clearing sky, the scent of rain still lingering in the air, and behind them, the fire went on burning slow and sure. Like everything they were building, like everything they had found, by June, the wildflowers had taken the far edge of the pasture, blooming in loose clusters along the fence Isaiah had mended just weeks before. Cora had begun to pick them by habit, tying them with twine and leaving them in tin cups near the windowsill. Kit followed her now wherever she wandered, his step steadier, his voice louder. Isaiah had taken to calling him the Little Scout, and the name stuck. That morning, Loretta was scrubbing the last of the winter soot from the stovepipe elbow when Isaiah came in from the field with news. Ryder came through from Deer Lodge, he said, hanging his hat and brushing the dust from his sleeves. Said the circuit judge'll be in town come the 14th. Loretta straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. That soon, he nodded. Said they're holding court for 2 days, then he rides south. She didn't speak right away. She leaned one hip against the table, the light from the window catching the edge of her jaw. You thinking what I think you are? I figure we've already made the life, Isaiah said. Might be time to put a name to it. She crossed the room, slow and measured, until she stood in front of him. Most folks wait longer after what I came through. You sure it doesn't trouble you? Isaiah tipped his head, his gaze steady. Only thing that troubles me is not doing right by you. Loretta's throat moved as she swallowed. You'd stand before a judge for that? I'd stand before any man, Loretta. She pressed her palm to his chest, above the buttons of his shirt, and let out a soft breath that sounded like something letting go. Then let's ride in together. Isaiah nodded once, and that was settled. They spent the next few days preparing in quiet ways. Loretta took in the seams of her dress and stitched a hem where it had frayed. Isaiah rode out to the creek bend and returned with smooth stones, which Cora helped him line along the path to the porch. He whittled a small box for the rings, though Loretta said she didn't need one. He made it anyway. When the morning came, they left the cabin before dawn. Isaiah had harnessed the mule cart, and Loretta sat beside him with Kit in her lap, Cora between them, all wrapped in shawls against the early chill. The ride to town took most of the morning, the road winding narrow through pine and dust, and the occasional bleached fence post leaning tired against the slope. Deer Lodge buzzed with the kind of quiet activity Isaiah never missed, but today it felt different. Today it held purpose. The judge was an older man with a voice like dry rope. He asked no questions beyond the ones required, and when Isaiah said, "I do," his hand didn't shake. Loretta's voice was low but steady. "I do." The children stood nearby, Cora holding Kit's hand. She looked up only once, and Isaiah caught the flicker of a smile on her face, a knowing one, like she understood something bigger than the words being said. Afterward, they walked the length of the street, Loretta's hand tucked into the crook of Isaiah's arm. She bought a length of ribbon for Cora and a small tin whistle for Kit, and they shared a meal of cured ham and fresh cornbread at a quiet table behind the general store. They returned home before nightfall, the sun warm on their backs and the road behind them soft with dust. Cora fell asleep against Loretta's shoulder, and Kit curled into Isaiah's side, mouth slack, fingers still holding the whistle. That night, after the children were put to bed, Loretta stood on the porch in her stocking feet, staring out past the trees where the moonlit slope glowed pale and still. Isaiah came to stand beside her. "You miss anything about what came before?" She shook her head. "No, not anymore." He slid his hand around her waist, pulled her close. "You think it'll last, this peace?" "It already has," she said. "Everything else is just time catching up to it." They stood there until the moon rose high, the cabin behind them warm and full. Inside, Cora stirred once in her sleep, and Kit let out a quiet breath against the quilt. The night wrapped around them like a promise. Years passed quiet and steady, as they do when the land is kind and the people tending it are steady-hearted. Loretta planted rows of beans the next spring, and Isaiah built a second room off the kitchen. Cora learned to read by lamplight, her finger under each word, and Kit grew taller than the fence posts by 12. They made cider in the fall, boiled it slow with cloves and smoked apples, and brought jars into town to trade. Folks began to call their place the Alder homestead. Though no one asked where the name had come from, Isaiah never left the land again, and Loretta never asked him to. She had all she needed right there in the rhythm of his steps on the porch, in the steady lift of his hand to her back as they passed one another in the narrow kitchen, in the way he still looked at her like she was the first fire lit after a long, dark season. And when they sat out beneath the stars those years later, their fingers still laced between them, Loretta turned to him and said, "I can't remember before this, not clearly." Isaiah kissed her temple. "That's how you know it's home." They raised the children together, and the children grew strong. And the love between Isaiah and Loretta Alder never dimmed, only softened and deepened, like river stone worn smooth by time and care. Nothing grand ever came to them, only the kind of love that stayed. The kind that bore witness to every ordinary day and made it holy, and that was more than enough, for both of them. Forever.